Welcome, everybody. My name is Carlton Poindexter, and I'm the DC Lead Ambassador for the Black Municipal Plants Lead Prevention Program. And today we're going to talk about tenant rights and housing leasing arrangements in regards to lead and lead within the home. And today we have our special guest, Ludeen Green, who will introduce herself further to elaborate on tenant and legal rights.
Thank you, Carlton. As you mentioned, my name is Ludeen McCarthy-Green. I am the one of the family advocacy manager at Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. It's a pleasure to be here today. I appreciate the invitation from Black Millennials for Flint. At Green and Healthy Homes, our mission is to break the link from unhealthy housing with unhealthy families. And that's taking a look at some of the environmental hazards that's affecting the home, including lead poisoning, asthma triggers, as well as injury prevention, and looking at an energy efficiency model as well, and what does that look like for homes in vulnerable communities for many of our Black and Brown families. So happy to talk to you today about what some of those rights are and how we use that throughout our GHHI interaction with our communities.
Thank you for that. We're very appreciative that you were able to join us. And so we'll dive right into our first question. So what should residents be looking for in terms of lead within like the lease agreement?
A good question. And oftentimes we're so excited, or resident be so excited of moving into a new place and just starting afresh, not taking the time to kind of double down on some of the rights and responsibilities when it comes to landlords on a rental property. So first, if a tenant's considering moving into a pre-1978 rental, there are a couple of things from a state perspective that's required. And the reason why I mentioned pre-1978, or why that's a key date for residents to remember, is because lead paint was banned in the United States in 1978. So any home built prior to 1978 is presumed to have lead and does fall under Maryland's law when it comes to providing certain notifications as well. So that's first thing you should be checking. Is this a pre-1978? If it's not, then we're not concerned about lead paint. There may be other issues, but we're not concerned about lead paint. So if it's a pre-1978, the landlord should be providing a lead paint disclosure form. What is that disclosure? It's basically saying that lead paint hazards may or may not be in the property, and it should not, right? They're renting and putting on the market, it should not. But that disclosure is letting the tenant be aware of the possibility of lead paint. And then on that disclosure, and Carlton, it's usually found towards the back of the lease, right? It's not on the front. It's not very visible, but it is on the back of the lease or towards the back. A landlord may actually have a tenant initial that you've seen the disclosure, read it, understand it. I'll be honest, some tenants just don't have the knowledge to double check what is this actually saying. They initial it and then they sign it and move on. But the requirement is that is disclosed and should be in the lease. So that's the first thing. If that's not in there and it's a pre-1978, you want to draw it back and says, hey, why am I not being fully disclosed? Two, Maryland also requires lead informational pamphlets as well. So the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, requires each rental property or property for sale pre-1978 to be given an EPA pamphlet that says protect your family from lead in your home. It's a little blue book. Sorry, I don't have one here. If I was in the office, I probably would have one, but it's a little blue book. You can find it on the EPA's website, giving you education and awareness about lead in the home. That is required by Maryland law to be attached or given with the lease. In addition to Maryland's Department of Environment Notice of Tenants' Rights. So Notice of Tenants' Rights needs to be there. Maryland Department of Environment website is where you can find that. It's about a 3-4 page of a FAQ questionnaire that's provided to the tenant. And then lastly, this is for Maryland, the landlord is required to give a lead inspection certificate. That's a passing certificate, meaning that there was a visual inspection by a lead risk assessor or inspector, and a dust wipe clearance saying that it passed the levels and a tenant's able to move in there. So I know I spit out a lot of information, Carlton, but I can't tell you how each one of those things are important. And those are needed at the beginning of the tenancy, not during or not towards the end.
And so in terms of how residents should interpret these different pieces, if they're not there, then they should be able to ask, or if they're not sure, can they get clarification with the landlord advisor about these documents?
Yeah, so they definitely, one of the things when I talk to tenants is to try to empower them, right? That they shouldn't be fearful, they should ask. I know that this is built, in 1920s, especially in Baltimore City. We have a lot of our homes that are built in 1920s. They should be asking, where is the lead certificate? Is there any other informational pamphlets that I should get? Is your property registered with MDE? Because what's that doing is a preventative, protective, proactive approach prior to moving to a home and then possibly being exposed, either them or other occupants in the home being exposed to lead exposures.
Thank you. And on that note, as we kind of talked about the tenant's responsibility and what the tenant can do, where does the housing owner's responsibility begin and end when it comes to providing this information when it pertains to lead?
Yeah. So we talked about how from the landlord, from the outset, from the beginning, right? You put your property on the market, the due diligence is that putting a property in the market, not only saying on surface it looks good, but it also passes all the compliance measures too in Maryland as well. So a landlord's required to do that from the beginning. That's what the law requires. And then the burden shifts after the tenant moves in, right? Let's just say in a great scenario, landlord has done all the things that's required by law. You may be thinking, is that it, right? And the burden shifts to the tenant. While in their home, one of the things that causes lead to be a hazard is when it chips, flakes, or peel. When that starts to happen, you wave the red flag. Landlord, send them a notice. It's chipping, the paint it's exposing, my child is in here, in terms of going about what are the next steps? How are we going to remediate it? So in the beginning, it's the landlord to do that when they're putting that property out there. First day of lease signing, not only collecting the security deposit and exchanging keys, but those things as well. And then it shifts to the tenant while they're in that property to notify the landlord if that paint starts to flake, chip, or peel.
Thank you. And with the paint chipping, and so initially the owners say that they've remediated the lead, they painted over it, and then as the tenant moves in, like you said, they're living there, the paint starts chipping, then there's the potential of lead exposure. If the resident's unsure about this potential lead exposure now, the paint potentially chipping, what are their legal rights to access this information and other potential resources?
Yeah, and so Maryland gets a little bit more. Like I said, our laws are probably one of the strongest in the country. So we need an inspection in the beginning. And if afterwards, after the tenant's been in there, it starts to chip or flake, it requires a landlord to hire a certified lead inspector. I want to really stress that. Sometimes we're so known to use Mr. Joe, who's always fixing, the leaky faucet or fixing different things. That's not how it works with lead. Lead is very dangerous. It's a neurotoxin if it gets into a child's body. So you need someone who's certified to do that. And once they've done that work and remediated that, you get an inspection that says modified risk reduction. That's a legal term of art, but basically saying that things have been modified to encapsulate and avoid the paint from continuing to being a hazard. But from a tenant perspective, right, if say that's not working, where the landlord's not being responsive, what are the resources that are out there for them? The local health department. The local health department is a very integral part of it. If children are getting tested at their local health department, they will notify, especially in Baltimore City, they will notify the property owner that there's been a child that's been poisoned in that home. And we're looking at poisoning being at a level of 5 and above. So Maryland has aligned with the CDC reference level. So we're looking at a 5 or above. Notifying the landlord and talking to the family or the parent or guardian about steps to take to reduce that child's lead level. Another resource is the local housing authority as well. They do have certain ability to issue a violation notice on the property if that has not been remediated within a certain reasonable time. And then we want to look at state agencies. So we have the Maryland Department of Health, and we have the Maryland Department of Environment. Maryland Department of Environment regulates lead paint in Maryland and has the authority to issue violation notice, issues penalties and fines from that state agency. And then we also have our courts. One of the ways that I play a role at Green and Healthy Homes Initiative is representing tenants who have not been able to work out with landlords of getting through that process of remediation, and have literally thrown their hands up in the air and says, Ms. Green, please help me, right? I'm living in an unhealthy home. You know, how can we go about that? And our legal remedies include filing a rent escrow. And in a very short one sentence, rent escrow is putting fire to the landlord's feet. It puts the money into the rent court. Landlord no longer gets rent. It goes into the court's escrow account, and the court can order the landlord to fix those things. So when I mentioned about Maryland having strong laws, it's not just from a local level, state level, but also from the judicial process as well. And these are all available for tenants to use. And then just lastly, just legal remedies in terms of liability, right? You can contact an attorney and says, it's been 60, 90 days, my child is still in here and nothing has happened. What can I do? You want to start thinking about if the landlord has notice, if there's any liability risk there.
Thank you. And you touched on that. You touched on actually the next question perfectly. And I guess if you just really narrow it down into some like 3 or 4 steps, and what considerations and steps should a resident take if lead is found in their home? And just if you had to take the 4 or 5 main tips.
All right, and let's break it up. We can break it down to 5 tips. The first thing I would say is notice, right? Make sure if it's a gut feeling like this doesn't seem right, or something doesn't, it's flaking, it's dusty, put the landlord on notice. Use that as an option. So send a notice of defect to the landlord of the chipping, flaking, paint, or exposure. To get the child tested as well. You want to be aware of what that lead test is, so that you can provide the proper remediation for that child, or nutrition or counseling for that child. 3, cleaning. We always mention never a dry scraping of lead dust because it spreads and exacerbates the problem. So when we talk about cleaning, we're talking about like a wet wipe down. And then if possible, right, relocation, right? If the issues are not able to be fixed immediately, you want to look at relocation, obviously somewhere else where more of a healthy place. And then lastly, I would say using your legal remedies. In the state of Maryland, you have that opportunity to raise those issues in court, in local district court, to, as I mentioned, using the rent escrow as an option. Essentially, lead is a threat to someone's health, and it changes the trajectory of a child. So that remedy is there, and they should use that.
All right. Thank you, Ludeen. You gave us a lot of great information for us as people and us as tenants that are living in these buildings to know that now we have, a greater sense of agency, that we do have resources out there to help us if we do have lead in the home, and giving us the step-by-step on different ways to do it. I know a lot of yours is specific to Maryland, but it's very much so applicable to nationwide, and just giving us the 5 main tips of how we should go about navigating the situation should we find lead in our home and our landlords aren't being responsive. So I just want to say thank you for all that great information, and we appreciate you joining us today for this interview.
Thank you, Carlton. It's a pleasure, and I'm happy to continue working, doing this great work with my colleagues, Green and Healthy Homes, Ludeen, Norton, and many other lead advocates, including Black millennials for Flint. So thank you, Carlton.
Thank you.